Well, hello, New Life Church. Glad to have you joining us for our message this week. You know, there are times when I look at this stream, this branch of Christianity that we're a part of, that theologically has the word evangelical attached to it. There are challenges in some people's minds regarding the political aspects of that and all. But I look at this evangelical faith structure, faith stream that we have, and I have wondered, why have we always done what we have done? And maybe more importantly, is why have we not done some of the things that we have not done? Let me give you an idea of where I'm headed with this. So when many mainline churches back in the late 1800s and early 1900s embraced a more liberal theology, their ministry approach became focused largely on doing things for people. It was expressions of love and expressions of the gospel that they wanted to focus on. It became known as the social gospel approach to ministry. The more conservative arm of the church during those days ended up having the name evangelical attached to it, and they reacted to this not just with a recommitment to conservative theology, but with oftentimes just like a wholesale rejection of virtually anything that was characterized with the Catholic Church or with the more liberal denominations. Growing up for myself, the words social gospel were practically taboo in my environment because those churches only cared about doing good works. They weren't focused on a relationship with Jesus Christ, or focused really on salvation, or focused on life transformation and evangelism. This year is the 100th anniversary of the Christian Missionary Alliance's mission work actually, in the country of Burkina Faso, where Nancy and I served for about 11 years. When Alliance missionaries first arrived back in 1923, our mission focused on starting churches and training pastors. There was a different mission that landed a couple years actually earlier than we did, and they focused on starting churches and educating kids, building schools. 100 years later, they're about 10 times larger than the Alliance Church is, even though our theologies are very, very similar. And they have educated, trained leaders at the upper echelons all throughout Burkina Faso society and politics and government. Part of our reasoning behind focusing on starting churches and training pastors and totally ignoring education, doing very little in the area of medical work, was our belief that we were doing the spiritual thing. Whoops. Talk about a mistake that we didn't start rectifying until about 75, maybe 80 years afterwards. So this coming Wednesday is what is known as Ash Wednesday. It's the beginning of the season of Lent. Most years, Lent sneaks up on me. Part of it is because throughout my entire childhood, 17 plus years at home growing up in First Baptist Church and then an Alliance Church, not once do I ever recall the word Lent being mentioned in church. It was taboo. That's what other churches do. We don't do that. Liberal churches and Catholic churches, they did Lent. In order to distance ourselves from their theology, we threw Lent out with the proverbial water throughout the baby with the bathwater, and we didn't focus on it, even though the three historical emphases of Lent, listen to what these focus on, okay? They focus on, first, giving up something that draws you away from God. Usually this involved fasting, okay, abstaining from food in some manner, but after a while, it included more than just food. So giving up something that draws you away from God, adding something into your regular routine that draws you closer to God as a spiritual practice. And then the third thing was giving a little bit extra in the area of your time or your money in extra service toward others who are in need around you. Do you see why that would be so spiritually taboo? Of course not. Because it's not taboo. Yet I seem to remember that I was taught that we should be doing those three things all of the time, so why make an extra emphasis of it during those 6+ weeks of the season of Lent? Well, maybe for one reason that we ought to do something like that is Jesus himself exemplified when he went off into the desert for 40 years. He exemplified, or 40 days, excuse me. He exemplified a time of heightened spiritual focus. So if he did it, well, I think it might make sense for us to do so as well. Wouldn't that be a good example for us to follow in the weeks leading up to Easter? So I am intentionally going to do all three of those things over these next 6+ weeks, and I invite you to join me as well. And in this season of Lent, I'm going to be sharing messages on some of the final teachings of Jesus that took place in those days or in those last weeks just before he was arrested, crucified, and resurrected. And today, we're going to start with revisiting a teaching of Jesus's that always helps me put things into perspective. Something that took place the week before he was crucified. So let's take a look. We're going to be in Luke chapter 20, starting actually in verse 20. And this is what we find that the scriptures tell us. Keeping a close watch on him, the teachers of the law and the chief priests sent spies who pretended to be honest. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So the spies questioned him. Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. So is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Interesting, the types of questions some people get all focused on. He saw through their duplicity, Luke writes, and said to them, show me a denarius. Whose portrait and inscription are on it? Caesar's, they replied. And he said to them, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. They were unable to trap him in what he had said there in public, and astonished by his answer, they became silent. We'll end there at verse 26. So in response to their question, like a really high theologically important question at the time, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? In response to their question, Jesus says, why don't you give me a coin? It almost certainly would have been a coin with Tiberius Caesar on it. He was the stepson of Augustus Caesar and had followed him. He was the successor to Augustus Caesar. And he had been actually in power as one of the Caesars for many, many years up until this point in time. So they handed him a coin, and Jesus' response is among the most overlooked teachings of his. He says, whose portrait and inscription are on it? Well, obviously, it's got the portrait of the profile of Tiberius Caesar on it. And then Jesus says, so give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. The easy explanation and application that many people have come to regarding this is pay your taxes? Sure. And that's probably a reasonable application of this, all right? Some of you might remember, it's been over 20 years, do you realize that now? Some of you might remember the Toy Story movies, where in the original Toy Story movie, Andy is the little boy, and he gets a new toy, Buzz Lightyear, who's got all these features and stuff, and there's competition between the new toy, Buzz Lightyear, and the old toy, Woody the Cowboy. And in that movie where Andy is focused much more on Buzz Lightyear and Woody the Cowboy is being pushed off into the margins of Andy's life, Woody has this existential crisis going on. Who am I? Am I good for anything? He doesn't love me any longer. And then there's this part in this movie where Andy is reminded to look at the bottom of his boot. And on the bottom of his boot is scribbled in children's scripts the name Andy, as a reminder to him who he belonged to. And that cleared up and put his heart at ease, his value and his identity, whose name is written on your boot. That makes it clear. In a sense, Jesus is referring to that. Now, in order to understand Jesus' teaching fully here, we actually need to go back to the very beginning of the Bible, the very first chapter of the Bible in the story of creation, where this is what we're told in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. We're at the end of the 6 days of creation. This is what's recorded. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. He created him, male and female, he created them. And what Jesus is doing, he is able himself, certainly, to connect the dots between what he's saying in Luke 20 with what is written about creation back in Genesis 1. It's as if he wanted them to understand that every human born comes in with the designation God's. That, like, imprinted on the bottom of our feet is the name God. We belong to God. His image is imprinted permanently on our lives. Every aspect of every human being is to be his. So what does that mean for me today? What does that mean for you today? Well, this week I asked myself questions like these. Would God be comfortable having his name be associated with my thoughts? Or would he cringe to have my thoughts be attributed to someone with God's image on them? Would God be eager to have his name imprinted on my political opinions? Would God want to be associated with Larry Burg's reputation? That was a hard one to reflect on. Would the way that you talk about, the way perhaps that some of you gossip about others, be something that God would want to have attributed to him? Would the example of how you use your finances be something that God would use as a model for others to duplicate? These are some of the questions that I want to be asking and reflecting on more deeply during this season of Lent. A re-examination of giving to God every aspect of my being, because every aspect of my being has God imprinted on it and should not be hypocritical. Or perhaps a better word would be inconsistent with that. With that in mind, then, this teaching where Jesus is saying, give to Caesar what legitimately belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. And the way you'll know what you should give to God is anything that you see the image of God imprinted on. Every human being, Genesis makes that clear. So with that teaching in mind, now let's go back and let's take a look at what we know about these guys who are trying to trap Jesus, who are asking him these questions, okay? Because we see a lot of inconsistencies. All right? So I want to consider the actions of the people that Jesus is talking to, considering the context. How is the image of God reflected in the lives of those who are approaching Jesus? First, the question is, who is he talking to? Well, we're told not by Luke, who talks about the teachers of the law and the religious leaders, but we're told actually by Matthew and Mark that this group of individuals that were the spies that were hanging out with Jesus and all, that some of them were Pharisees, so very religious people, but some of them were Herodians. Herodians weren't associated with any religious aspect. They were associated with King Herod. Herodians, they were political people, all right? And these two didn't seem to really make a cohesive group. Just as a side note, politicians and genuine faith overlap far less than politicians would like us to believe. So Luke 20 verse 20 says this, keeping a close eye on him, they sent spies. The wording here for keeping watch or keeping a close watch means to scrupulously observe something in order to ensure final success. Well, success. What would success look like for these guys? What was their hope as they were considering success with this person, Jesus? Well, their goal included what we actually could read in the very verse before, which I haven't read yet. Verse 19, just before this verse, says this: the teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest him immediately. And also what we read in the very last verse of the previous chapter, in Luke chapter 19, where we are told this, verse 47, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. So success to them, what did it look like? It looked like arrest and execution. Those two things, all right? In other words, eliminate Jesus from their lives. And they go about this, how? By getting closer to him. By spending time in his very presence. Not to follow him in submission, not to learn from his teaching and correct their ways, mind you, but to look for this golden opportunity to eliminate his threat to their way of life, to their legitimacy as leaders. They draw close to him to gain success according to their standards, but certainly not success in the eyes of God. The next line tells us this. They pretended to be honest, or pretended to be righteous or sincere, some versions say. All right, the word pretended here means literally to act the part, like an actor on a stage, or to impersonate, all right? Trying to fool Jesus and trying to fool the crowd. Let me tell you a little bit about what my life was like, the type of person I was when I was in college, okay? So it was actually my junior year of college. I was asked and volunteered kind of with my camera to take pictures for the college yearbook, okay? Didn't do a whole lot of it, but periodically they would say, hey, we need some pictures done here. Would you take care of this and all? And one of the assignments that they gave to me was to take just casual pictures of the professors as they were involved in teaching their classes and different things like that. And all. So I arranged to set up posed pictures of the professors in serious conversations with students, all right? Only here's what I did. I didn't choose students that were real sincere in their studies. I chose exclusively my goofball friends, none of whom were very serious yet about their studies, even though many of us were in our junior years of college at the time. I don't know how many pictures I took. It was probably like 2 rolls of film, so maybe about 50 pictures that I submitted. And I had all these pictures with my friends, with the professors and all, and standing there, talking with the professors with their hands like this, like they're engaged in deep conversation and all. And of all the pictures that I submitted, there were only, I think, like 2 that got included in the yearbook. Why was that? Well, clearly someone in the editor's staff had looked at this and could see exactly what I was doing. I was trying to make it seem like me and my not serious friends were sincere and serious students who were regularly involved in conversation about deep theological matters with the professors at our Christian college. Back to these spies who are similarly pretending, who are similarly trying to set up a scenario that clearly was nowhere near the truth. Think about it. They have the image of God stamped on their beings, and they are in the very presence of that God, their creator, the source of their life, who had stamped his image on their beings. And the whole time they are doing it, they are faking it. Perhaps like some of us today. We come to church and we put on our nice clothes and we put a smile on our faces and we fake sometimes that we are something that we are not. It begs the question in my mind, are we pretending too? Are we pretenders, just like they were? Lent seems like an ideal time to reflect seriously on our tendency to be pretenders, to ask how we are wanting to look like people with God's image stamped deeply on our actions, on our words, and on our attitudes. But in reality, we're using deceit to project a totally different image than what reality is. The next line from verse 20 says this: these spies hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so they might hand him over. Reminds me of the liberal media as well as the conservative media, who are waiting to pounce on a mistaken word or an unclear statement to twist it to their advantage and be able to put it on the next political campaign commercial or advertisement. Their ultimate goal is the gotcha moment, all right? Find a technicality and exploit it because a person happened to say one word that wasn't 100% correct. Oh my goodness, if that's what people were doing with me, trust me, there's more than enough that I say in my messages, both recorded as well as the ones in person and all, where afterwards I think that wasn't the right word to use, certainly could have sent a wrong message. I would never have made it as a politician. These spies in Jesus' time were only there to search more carefully so they'd have a reason to dismiss Jesus, to dismiss his teachings as invalid, all the time committed to making zero changes in their lives. But if you think about it, well, I think we can be the same way. I can. Probably many of you can be as well. There's this inconsistency oftentimes within us where we are imprinted with the image of God on us, but when we come across something in the Bible that doesn't align with our experiences or our present situation or our preconceived notions and opinions, we treat truth as though it is wrong. I've known Christians who have seemed more intent on finding technicalities or obscure interpretations of Scripture to dismiss what they disagree with so that they don't have to ever make any changes to their lives. Made in the image of God, we can ignore obvious truths to find escape hatches about matters like what he says really about the use of our finances. I wonder how closely any of us are to the expectations that God would have of our finances. Lent might be a time of the calendar year when we look at that a little bit more closely. We ignore obvious truths to find escape hatches about matters like how we should treat foreigners, attitudes that we should have to immigrants in the cities, people from different ethnic backgrounds. We ignore obvious truths from Scripture to find escape hatches about matters like his expectations for extending forgiveness, which might be, from my perspective, it might be the single greatest area of relational disobedience in the church today. I believe it is Francis Chan, but I'm not 100% sure because I couldn't track down the quote this week already, who wrote something to the effect of this: when I read something in the Bible that I disagree with, I've come to the conclusion that I'm the one who's always wrong. Can I repeat that? Listen to that. When I read something in the Bible that I disagree with, I've come to the conclusion that I'm the one who is always wrong. That's the approach of humility. That's the approach of someone with the image of God, not just imprinted on their lives at the beginning of their existence, but someone who is living in consistency with that image of God imprinted on their beings. These spies? No way. Catch something Jesus says that can be misconstrued, that was their goal, that can be taken out of context, that can be weaponized against him, then turn him over to godless political authorities knowing exactly what would happen. He would eventually have his life taken from him. Their attitude is, whatever you do, do not embrace the foundational image of God in your life so fully that you're obligated to make a change. That was their approach. Unfortunately, it is also the approach of many people in our churches today. Again, three things that I see from just this one verse. These men draw physically close to Jesus. They are in worship. They put on exterior appearances of sincerity to make people come to conclusions, including Jesus, that they're doing all things right. And they listen intently to every word that he says, not to obey, but to trap. They do all these things in a way that is totally at odds with what Jesus desires for them. They do all of these things that is totally at odds with the image of God imprinted on their hearts. He calls them out on it. Give to God what is God. Give to God fully anything that has the image of God imprinted on it, including you and your actions in every aspect of your beings. So the season of Lent, again, I want to place my highest value not on the appearances like these men did, but on the deep, to the core consistency with being identified with and being owned by the one who made me in his image. So back now to the three emphases of Lent that I'd really encourage you to be thinking through and reflecting on between now and Ash Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, February 22nd. First is this: giving up something that draws me away from the Lord. For several weeks now, here's what I've been sensing, that I need a pause from the use of my smartphone to put it into perspective and to keep it in its proper place. I think I spend way too much time on it. So my plan is to take a sabbatical from my phone during the season of Lent, using just a basic phone that makes calls and does texts. I was in a conversation with a group of Christ followers here at New Life Church a few weeks ago, and When this was discussed, I thought, I think I've got an old phone that I'm hopefully going to be able to switch cards into, and I'll be able to do that. And my hope is that it will do the basics for me that I need it to do, and re-alter the course that I have in my life and how much time I spend with the thing. All right. I suspect that I'm not the only one that might benefit from doing that with my cell phone, but there's other things that you could take a break from, that you could fast from, which is what I want to do with my smartphone. You could fast from some types of food, okay, maybe dessert, okay. You could certainly fast from TV. You could fast from coffee. You could fast from social media. Think up something that probably has too large of a place in your life that is becoming a hindrance to your relationship with Jesus Christ. The second emphasis of Lent: add a spiritual practice that draws you closer to God. Tyrell and I have chosen a book that we're planning to work through during Lent. It's got 40 chapters to it, okay? And it's going to be something that we are looking forward to as far as how it's going to challenge us in our spiritual lives. And then on a regular basis, we're going to be talking through that. But you want to know something? Our church is connected with Right Now Media. We've got a subscription to what's called rightnowmedia.org, where anyone who attends our church and you want to contact us, we can certainly help you take advantage of that subscription at no cost to you. And on that website, there are actually thousands of different video options that you could choose to spend time on in the weeks to come. You might want to do a study on the book of the Bible. You might want to do a study of the Ten Commandments, a study of Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes perhaps, a study of key women from the Bible. There are so many resources, and the best part for you is that our church's subscription makes it free to you. So why not consider doing that? All right, and then finally, the third step: giving your time or money in extra services toward others. So I oftentimes have, and by the end of this week, before Lent starts actually on Ash Wednesday, I'm going to be taking actually a fairly healthy sum of money and tucking it in my wallet, in a little corner of my wallet, and intentionally looking for opportunities where I can bless someone who is in a position of greater financial need than I am at this stage of my life. Maybe you might want to do the same. Or maybe you might find that instead of giving your finances, you'll give yourself in time and in service to others around you. I invite you to join me as we seriously revisit what it means to give to God fully what fully belongs to God, and to do that seriously between now and Easter Sunday. Let me pray. There isn't a person watching this video who doesn't know that the Christian life continues to get cluttered with things that draw us further away from God, distract us from God. There are things that we neglect that need to be added into our practices of following after you closely, God. And then clearly, we do not fully engage in giving of our time or giving of our resources to others who are around us in need. But during this Lenten season, God, that is a desire of my heart, and I hope it will be a desire in the hearts of many who are watching this, and then that we might see you act. We might see you touch our hearts in some great ways and use us to bless others. That is my prayer. Be honored in our efforts as we do that. Open our eyes to what you want us to be able to see as we give ourselves fully to the God whose image is imprinted on us. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Hope you have a wonderful week. Ash Wednesday. Start with me. God bless you all.